Hello, and welcome to this podcast brought to you by the Norfolk Historical Society, which for the past 122 years has been working to preserve, protect, and promote the unique history and heritage of Norfolk County. Our guest this morning is Helen Bartens. Helen, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Helen is at present the curator at the Education Center at Backus Mill, but that's not all she's done. I'm going to ask you to just fill in a little of your background for us before we get into the interview.
Oh, sure. I've always been a museum fan since I was very small, so it wasn't much of a surprise when I went into history and then a museum studies degree, and then continued working in museums throughout southern Ontario before finally ending up at the Backus Historic Site.
And you were, for a while, the curator here at Everbrook Donnelly Museum.
Yes, I was.
So you're very familiar with the area. What is your role as the curator at Backus Mill?
Yeah, so I take care of the collections and the exhibits. So my side is very much the collections side of it. So I'm taking care of all of the historic buildings and all of the artifacts that we house in the museum, as well as making all the exhibits, setting up the displays each year. Since we are a seasonal site, we take them down in the winter, and making it really interesting for all of our visitors, and then overseeing the running of the museum when we're open.
Great. Those people who are listening to this, and there might be one or two in Norfolk County who do not know what Backus Mill is, could you give us a short history lesson of the mill?
Sure. So the property was granted to John Backus. So he was originally from Yorkshire, and in the 1790s submitted a petition to be allocated a land grant for a mill seat in the Long Point area, which is kind of the area that the site is now, a little bit larger as well, because he got quite a few hundred acres. He and his family were living in the area by 1796 before officially being granted the land in 1797. And the Backus grist mill was built and in operation by about 1798. So then the Backus family farmed and milled flour just north of Port Rowan until 1956, when the property was sold to the Big Creek Conservation Area to ensure its long-term preservation of the site. And then the Big Creek Conservation Area and Otter Creek Conservation Area amalgamated in 1971 to become the Long Point Region Conservation Area, which currently operates the Backus Heritage Conservation Area and the Backus Historic Site today.
Now, the mill is only part of the larger heritage conservation area. What else is on site that people can visit of an historic nature?
Yeah, so not just the mill, but we called the entire site the Backus Historic Site. So we have the 4 original buildings to the site. So the mill, the homestead, which is about 1852, a garage which has the original car in it, and a playhouse. So those were all original to the Backus family. And then over the years, other historic structures from the region have been moved in and created kind of like a Pioneer Village style museum. So we have an octagonal schoolhouse, which is really, really rare, especially in Ontario. We've got a number of barns, a carriage shop, a blacksmith shop, and some log cabins. So a number of historic buildings that we're preserving.
What other activities, besides the educational ones, take place at the conservation area?
Yeah, so we have 5 campgrounds. So we have seasonal camping as well as nightly camping. There's hiking trails. Some of them have interpretive guides to go with them to give you a little bit of information about the trails themselves. There's fishing at the mill pond, and then there's the Conservation Education Center as well.
Now, before COVID, which really hurt everyone, but you in particular, because you couldn't have anyone out there for almost 2 years. How many people would have visited per year before COVID?
Before COVID, our numbers were about 27,000 visitors per year. Unfortunately, with COVID and our very, very small buildings, we had to stay closed just because we cannot clean and social distance in those types of buildings. All the sanitizers, from a fun conservation side of things, damage historic finishes and buildings, so we can't use the proper sanitizers on the historic building, so it was safer to keep them closed.
Well, that's a remarkable number. Think about it. That's the educational programs and the camping and the trails and everything else. And I doubt that there is a former elementary student in Norfolk who hadn't at one time or another visited Backus Mill, either for the historic recreations, the biosphere activities. I think almost every single one probably visited the Cherry Valley Schoolhouse and know the area very well. And in that regard, the Education Center, which is really what we're here to talk about, is undergoing a revitalization now to update it. And please tell us about what's going on there, because it's very exciting.
Yeah, it's really, really exciting. So we usually have about 5,000 students per year visit between the outdoor education and the heritage education programs. So we are taking this time to fix up the education center. So it's a project that has been in the works for about 4 years now, slowly coming up with plans and doing fundraising and a lot of grant writing. And the building was built in 1991. It was opened. So after 30 years, it was about time for some upgrades, and the exhibits went in about that time too. And it wasn't as useful for our education programs anymore because the Ontario curriculum has gone a bit of a different way over the past 30 years.
Yeah, it happens.
And so we would want to bring the exhibit back in line with the curriculum so that our outdoor educator can use it with the school classes and really utilize it. So we managed to get some federal funding, which is absolutely wonderful, and we've been fundraising. So we are doing part of it is accessibility upgrades. So currently the building is not physically accessible, so we're putting in automatic doors to the entrance, a proper ramp to get into the building, and then proper accessible and barrier-free washrooms so that everybody can access the building and take part in the fun activities that happen there. And then we're also upgrading the exhibit. So where lighting isn't working, we're going to be fixing that up. We'll be replacing the flooring so that it is easily cleanable. And the exhibit itself will change. So we are going to be putting through a cohesive storyline throughout the entire building, starting with the upper gallery where you come in at the front doors and talking about the watershed here. So our mandate is watershed wide for the Long Point region. So what animals are here? Why is this region so significant ecologically? And then looking into human impact on the environment, how our thoughts and our ideas and our uses of the environment have changed over the years, looking into some of the more difficult parts of conservation. So we are in a climate crisis at the moment, so we will be addressing that as well, and issues like biodiversity that are so important to the environment.
How long do you think this is going to take? Have you started?
Yeah.
And how long is the project planned for?
So we are planning to open next spring. So next spring to next summer. So that will be everything grand opening.
Excellent,
So
excellent.
will be fantastic.
Now, how can people contribute to this project? Can they help fund this, and can they volunteer to help do this?
So yeah, we are still taking donations. The easiest way is on our website, lprca.on.ca, and we have a section right on the website for the Conservation Education Center revitalization that has a link. that we use the Canada Helps platform for donations for there. We will have donor recognition in our exhibit as well. So depending on the level, we're going to have a registry that will be online and in a book, and then also a donor wall.
One last thing. Can people visit now? Can they go in the historic buildings? I know they can camp. But the center will probably be, is it open now for people to visit?
So the education center is closed until our grand opening again, because we'll be starting to do tear out of elements of the exhibit that aren't going to stay. We're going to be keeping a lot of the big dioramas and just refreshing them and rephrasing their content. So that wonderful diorama as you walk in the front door with all the animals, that will still stay. But because of the construction, we will be keeping that building closed. However, part of the historic site will be open this summer.
Oh, excellent. And can teachers contact you now to set up for next spring or in the fall?
So we will hopefully be back to offering education programs in the fall. It's still a little bit up in the air. We need to hire our educators again because unfortunately they've been off contract since COVID began. But we did teach one class this year. It was wonderful to have some students back in the historic site, but hopefully by fall we will have back up to full running.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear, because this is such an important part of this county's history and heritage, and it's such a well-known and loved spot. We wish you the best of luck with it. I want to thank you, Helen, for coming in today. I know you're busy and you're leaving here right now to go probably tear some things out. I'd like to thank everybody for listening today, and I want to remind you that the Norfolk Historical Society has a website that you can visit. You can become a member or contribute on the website. You can follow us on Instagram. You can check out our Facebook page, and you can take a look at our YouTube videos, which contain all sorts of interesting things about Norfolk heritage and history. On behalf of the Norfolk Historical Society, I'm Andy Blackwood, and we'll see you next time.